Welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to learn about tracts of the spinal cord. Tracts are defined as collections of nerve fibers within the central nervous system having same origin, course and termination. Tracts are collections of nerve fibers within the central nervous system. They all have same origin, course and same termination. Tracts are sometimes referred to as fasciculi or lemnisci. They can be referred sometimes as fasciculi or lemnisci. Classification of the tracts. Tracts are classified into three types: descending tracts, ascending tracts, intersegmental tracts. Descending tracts. They conduct impulses from the brain to the spinal cord. Descending tracts include lateral corticospinal tract, anterior corticospinal tract, rubrospinal tract, tectospinal tract, vestibulospinal tract, olivospinal tract, reticulospinal tract. Now let's see in detail about each descending tract. First let's see about corticospinal tract. Corticospinal, from the cortex to the spinal cord. The fibers while passing from cortex to the spinal cord passes through brainstem. Brainstem consists of three parts from above to below: midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. So the fibers when passing from the cortex to the spinal cord, they passes through midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. The fibers of corticospinal tract arises from motor cortex. The fibers then pass through corona radiata, internal capsule, midbrain, pons, medulla and reaches the spinal cord. In the lower part of the medulla, pyramidal decussation occurs. Most of the fibers, 75 to 80% of the fibers, decussate and continue down as lateral corticospinal tract. Nearly 20 to 25% of the fibers remain undecussated. They continue down as anterior corticospinal tract. Decussated fibers continue down as lateral corticospinal tract. Undecussated fibers continue down as anterior corticospinal tract. In the spinal cord, they terminate near anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. Descending tracts are motor fiber tracts. Anterior horn cell consists of motor neurons. Hence, the fibers of descending tracts terminate in anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. Posterior horn is related to sensory neurons. Anterior horn is related to motor neurons. Hence, the descending tract fibers terminate in anterior horns of the spinal cord. The fibers of the corticospinal tract passes through corona radiata, posterior limb of the internal capsule, midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata and reaches the spinal cord. In the lower part of the medulla oblongata, pyramidal decussation occurs. Most of the fibers, nearly 75 to 80% of the fibers decussate and continue down as lateral corticospinal tract. Nearly 20 to 25% of the fibers remain undecussated and continue down as anterior corticospinal tract. So we know that corticospinal tracts passes through midbrain, pons and medulla. When we see the cut section of the midbrain, the fibers of corticospinal tract passes through crus cerebri. Midbrain is divided into large anterior part and small posterior part. Large anterior part is called cerebral peduncle. From posterior to anterior, it consists of tegmentum, substantia nigra. In the middle part of the crus cerebri, the fibers of corticospinal tract passes. When we see the cut section of the pons, in the basilar part, you can see the longitudinal bundles. These longitudinal bundles contains corticospinal tract fibers. When we see the cut section of the upper medulla at the level of olives, the corticospinal tract fibers passes through pyramid. These are pyramids of medulla oblongata. In the lower part of the medulla, pyramidal decussation occurs. This is the cut section of the lower medulla showing pyramidal decussation. Now let's see about extrapyramidal tracts. It includes tectospinal tract, rubrospinal tract, reticulospinal tract, vestibulospinal tract. Tectospinal tract. The fibers of tectospinal tract arises from the tectum or superior colliculus of the midbrain. The fibers of tectospinal tract immediately after the origin cross the midline and reaches the opposite side. The fibers then descend down in the contralateral brainstem and reaches the spinal cord. It terminates near anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. Rubrospinal tract. The fibers of rubrospinal tract arises from the red nucleus. Red nucleus is present at the level of superior colliculus of the midbrain. You can see that the red nucleus is present in the midbrain at the level of superior colliculus. The fibers then continue down through the contralateral brainstem and terminates near anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. The fibers of tectospinal tract and rubrospinal tract decussate in the midbrain. This is cut section of the midbrain showing decussations of tectospinal tract and rubrospinal tract. So we know that tectospinal tract and rubrospinal tract passes through midbrain, pons and medulla and reaches the spinal cord. So in the cut sections of the midbrain, you can see the tectospinal tract, rubrospinal tract. In the cut section of the pons, you can see the tectospinal tract and rubrospinal tract. In the cut section of the medulla, you can see the tectospinal tract. Rubrospinal tract is not given in the diagram, but the rubrospinal tract is also present in the medulla. Vestibulospinal tract. From the vestibular nucleus to spinal cord. The fibers, after arising from the vestibular nuclei, passes through ipsilateral brainstem and terminates in anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. You can see the vestibular nuclei in the cut section of the pons and vestibular nuclei in the medulla. Reticulospinal tract. The fibers of reticulospinal tract arises from the reticular formation. There are two reticulospinal tracts. Lateral reticulospinal tract arises from reticular formation in the brainstem. Medial reticulospinal tract arises from reticular formation in the medulla. Both the reticulospinal tracts terminate onto anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. Now let's revise descending tracts. All the descending tracts terminate onto anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. Corticospinal tract arises from the motor cortex. Rubrospinal tract arises from the red nucleus. Tectospinal tract arises from the tectum or superior colliculus of the midbrain. Vestibulospinal tract arises from the vestibular nuclei in the pons and medulla. Spinal tract arises from the inferior alveolar nucleus present in the medulla. Reticulospinal tract arises from the reticular formation. Now let's see location of the descending tracts in the cut section of the spinal cord. Pyramidal tract. Lateral corticospinal tract. Lateral corticospinal tract in the lateral column. Anterior corticospinal tract in the anterior white column. Extrapyramidal tracts. Rubrospinal tract in the lateral white column. Remaining all in anterior white column except lateral reticulospinal tract. Olivospinal tract is present in the lateral white column. This tract is considered non-existent by some authors. Hence it is not mentioned in some textbooks. Tectospinal, vestibulospinal, medial reticulospinal in the anterior column. Rubrospinal, lateral reticulospinal in the lateral column. Olivospinal tract in the lateral column. Now let's see about ascending tracts. Ascending tracts conduct impulses from the periphery to the brain. It includes lateral spinothalamic tract, anterior spinothalamic tract, dorsal column pathway fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus, spinocerebellar tracts, posterior spinocerebellar tract, anterior spinocerebellar tract. Ascending tracts are sensory tracts. Ascending tracts consist of fibers that carry sensations. Posterior horn of the spinal cord is related to sensory neurons. Now let's see in detail about anterolateral spinothalamic tract. This tract carries the sensations from opposite half of the body. As it is carrying the sensations from opposite half of the body, the fibers of this tract has to cross the midline. This crossing over occurs at the level of the spinal cord and it is the second order neurons that crosses the midline. Pain and temperature sensations from opposite half of the body are carried by lateral spinothalamic tract. The sensations of crude touch or light touch and pressure from opposite half of the body are carried by anterior spinothalamic tract. There are three order neurons: first order neurons, second order neurons, third order neurons. First order neurons. The cell bodies of first order neurons are present in dorsal root ganglia of the spinal cord, and their fibers terminate into posterior horn cells of the spinal cord. Second order neurons. The cell bodies of second order neurons are present in posterior horn in the region of substantia gelatinosa. You can see here substantia gelatinosa. It is present in the posterior horn of the spinal cord. They terminate into VPL nucleus of the thalamus. The axons of second order neurons crosses the midline and reaches the opposite anterior right column of the spinal cord and ascends in the anterior right column of the spinal cord. It then ascends through the brainstem and reaches the VPL nucleus of the thalamus. The axons of second order neurons ascend through spinal cord, medulla oblongata, pons, midbrain, and reaches the thalamus, VPL nucleus of the thalamus. And the third order neurons passes from the thalamus to the sensory cortex. The axons of second order neurons in case of lateral spinothalamic tract crosses the midline and reaches the opposite lateral white column, and it ascends in the lateral white column of the spinal cord, then ascends to the brainstem and reaches the VPL nucleus of the thalamus. Third order neurons in both the tracts. Cell bodies are present in the VPL nucleus of the thalamus and their axons terminate into sensory cortex. Spinothalamic tracts from the spinal cord to thalamus. Hence, they are passing through medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain to reach the thalamus. So, in the cut sections of brainstem, we see the anterolateral spinothalamic tracts. This is the cut section of the upper medulla showing the lateral spinothalamic tract. They have not mentioned anterior spinothalamic tract, but the anterior spinothalamic tract is also present. It lies very close to lateral spinothalamic tract. This is the cut section of the pons. Both the lateral and anterior spinothalamic tracts are very close to each other and are collectively called spinal lemniscus. Spinal lemniscus is nothing but anterolateral spinothalamic tract. In the cut section of the midbrain, you can see the spinal lemniscus. Let us now see about dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway. This pathway carries the sensations from opposite half of the body. Hence, the fibers has to cross the midline. This crossing over occurs at the level of the medulla, and it is the second order neurons that crosses the midline. They carry the sensations of conscious proprioception, two-point discrimination, vibration sensations from opposite half of the body. There are three order neurons: first order neurons, second order neurons, third order neurons. First order neurons. Their cell bodies are present in dorsal root ganglia of the spinal cord. The fibers of first order neurons enter the spinal cord through dorsal root and then ascend up in the posterior white column of the spinal cord as fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. The fibers of first order neurons ascends up within the posterior white column of the spinal cord as fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. You can see in the posterior white column of the spinal cord, fasciculus gracilis carries the sensations from lower part of the body. Fasciculus cuneatus carries the sensations from the upper part of the body. The fibers carrying the sensations of the lower part of the body are present medially, and the fibers carrying the sensations of the upper part of the body are present laterally. The fibers of first order neurons terminate in nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus of the medulla. Second order neurons. Their cell bodies are present in nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus of the medulla. The axons of second order neurons form internal arcuate fibers. Internal arcuate fibers in the lower medulla crosses the midline and reaches the opposite side, where they turn upwards and continue as medial lemniscus, and they terminate into VPL nucleus of the thalamus. This is the cut section of the medulla. The axons of second order neurons form internal arcuate fibers. Internal arcade fibers crosses the midline and reaches the opposite side, and they turn upwards and ascend as medial lemniscus. This decussation occurs at the level of lower medulla. This decussation is called sensory decussation. The fibers of medial lemniscus terminate into VPL nucleus of the thalamus. Medial lemniscus passes from the lower medulla to pons, midbrain, and reaches the thalamus. So, in the cut sections of the midbrain, pons, and upper medulla, we can see the medial lemniscus. Cut section of the medulla at the level of olivary nucleus showing the medial lemniscus. Cut section of the pons showing the medial lemniscus. Cut section of the midbrain showing the medial lemniscus. Third order neurons. Their cell bodies are present in VPL nucleus of thalamus and their axons terminate in sensory cortex. Let us now see about spinocerebellar tracts. Spinocerebellar tract carries the sensations of unconscious proprioception. The sensations are carried to ipsilateral cerebellar cortex. Right side sensations are carried to right side cerebellar cortex. Now let's see about posterior spinocerebellar tract. There are two order neurons, first order neurons, second order neurons. First order neuron. Their cell bodies are present in dorsal root ganglia of the spinal cord. Their fibers terminate in nucleus dorsalis. You can see here nucleus dorsalis or Clarke's column. It is present in posterior horn of the spinal cord. Second order neurons. Their cell bodies are present in nucleus dorsalis. The axons of second order neurons enter the dorsolateral part of the lateral white column on the same side and ascend on the same side to reach the ipsilateral cerebellar cortex through inferior cerebellar peduncle. This is lateral white column. In the dorsolateral part of the lateral white column, posterior spinocerebellar tract is present. Anterior spinocerebellar tract. This tract also carries the sensations to ipsilateral cerebellar cortex. The right-sided sensations are carried to right-sided cerebellar cortex. In both posterior and anterior spinocerebellar tracts, the sensations are carried to ipsilateral cerebellar cortex. First order neurons. Same as that of posterior spinocerebellar tract, the cell bodies of first order neurons are present in dorsal root ganglion. The fibers of first order neurons terminate in nucleus dorsalis. Second order neurons, their cell bodies are present in nucleus dorsalis. The axons of second order neurons crosses the midline and reaches the opposite ventrolateral part of the lateral white column and ascend as anterior spinocerebellar tract. The fibers ascends through medulla, pons, and reaches the midbrain. Near the midbrain, it takes a bend downwards and passes through superior cerebellar cortex to enter the cerebellum. But we know that the sensations are carried to ipsilateral cortex. So the fibers has to cross the midline to reach the ipsilateral cerebellar cortex, terminating as mossy fibers. You can see the anterior spinocerebellar tract in the ventrolateral part of lateral white column of the spinal cord. This is lateral part of the lateral white column. In the ventrolateral part, anterior spinocerebellar tract. In the dorsolateral part of the lateral white column, posterior spinocerebellar tract is present. You can see that some of the axons of second order neurons ascend as anterior spinocerebellar tract in the lateral white column of the same side. These axons are not crossing over. They ascend in the lateral white column of the same side. Let us now revise ascending tracts. Anterolateral spinothalamic tract. First order neurons. Their cell bodies are present in dorsal root ganglia of the spinal cord. Their fibers terminate in posterior horn cells in the region of substantia gelatinosa. Second order neurons. Their cell bodies are present in posterior horn in the region of substantia gelatinosa, and the axons terminate in VPL nucleus of the thalamus. Third order neurons. Their cell bodies are present in VPL nucleus of thalamus and terminate in sensory cortex. Dorsal column pathway. First order neurons. Their cell bodies are present in dorsal root ganglia of the spinal cord. The fibers of first order neurons terminate in nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus of the medulla. Second order neurons. Their cell bodies are present in nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus of the medulla, and the fibers terminate in VPL nucleus of the thalamus. Third order neurons. Their cell bodies are present in nuclear nucleus of the thalamus and terminate in sensory cortex. Spinocerebellar tracts, they carry the sensations of unconscious proprioception to the ipsilateral cerebellar cortex. Posterior spinocerebellar tract, first order neurons, their cell bodies are present in dorsal root ganglia of the spinal cord. The fibers of first order neurons terminate in nucleus dorsalis. Second order neurons, their cell bodies are present in nucleus dorsalis. Their axons terminate in ipsilateral cerebellar cortex. The axons of second order neurons ascend upwards as posterior spinocerebellar tracts. Anterior spinocerebellar tracts, first order neurons same as that of posterior spinocerebellar tract. Second order neurons, their cell bodies are present in nucleus dorsalis. The axons of second order neurons. Axons of second order neurons, most of the axons crosses the midline and reaches the opposite ventrolateral part of the lateral white column and ascend upwards as anterior spinocerebellar tract reaches the midbrain. There it takes a bend downwards, passes through the superior cerebellar peduncle to reach the cerebellar cortex. It again crosses the midline and reaches the ipsilateral cerebellar cortex and terminates as mossy fibers. Location of ascending tracts in the cut section of the spinal cord. Anterior spinothalamic tract in the anterior white column. Lateral spinothalamic tract in the lateral white column. Fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus in the posterior white column. In the ventrolateral part of the lateral white column, anterior spinocerebellar tract. In the dorsolateral part of the lateral white column, posterior spinocerebellar tract.